So I'm Carol Marcus. So what I'm going to talk about is what happens once you're ready to begin a study. And you know, it's always fantastic when you finally find out you get your grant funded, that's great. But then after that, I can tell you, I sometimes get this cold feeling in the pit of my stomach saying, oh my God, can I actually pull off what I thought I would do? Where are we going to get these kids from? Are we trying to do too much with these kids? So far, we've always done okay. But I want to talk about some of the practical issues that you don't always think about initially when you're writing your grant, and it's only when you're beginning your study. So I always think, having done clinical research for some years now, the hardest thing is number one, recruitment, number two, recruitment, and number three, retention. And NIH has really changed their focus, especially if you're doing clinical trials. There's a lot of attention being paid on recruitment and on staying on schedule. And in fact, one of the other things I do is I'm director of the CHOP component of the CTRC, and we resubmitted our grant last month. And the whole RFA has changed to really emphasize getting trials done in time, recruiting adequately. So I recently had a clinical trial that was funded by NIH. And the first thing I get is this email from NIH with this lovely color illustration here with the warning zones in 3 different colors, and a handout explaining to me that I'm going to have to put in a report every 4 months. And these are the action plans if I don't meet, you know, if I'm meeting 50% of my target, if I'm meeting only 25% of my target. And they will close us down if we're not on time. So NIH has really been putting a lot of emphasis on this. And in a previous study that I started, initially it was a multi-center study and recruitment was quite slow. And I think that's what happens with studies. It takes a while. You learn what works and what doesn't work. Things start spreading by word of mouth. The people you're recruiting from find that it's working and send you more patients. And you get an exponential growth, but it's slow in the beginning. And it's really hard to explain that to NIH. So I think one needs strategies for this. So first of all, they do want a timeline from you, and it cannot be submitted just by you now. It has to be submitted by the program official in the research institute. So this was the form they wanted me to fill out. So what you could see here is for each year of the grant, for each quarter, how many patients I'm projecting, and then my cumulative total projected. And then I guess I've got to put in how many I actually get. And you could see it was signed off by my business official here. And NIH will be looking at this. So what I recommend, first of all, is that you put in a startup time to this. So if you look, I've actually got the first 6 months, I'm not planning to recruit any patients. So what am I planning to do in that startup time? As per my NIH plan, you need your IRB approval, which actually, in fact, you need to do as part of your just-in-time. So hopefully you've got that done already. Depending on the sort of study, the complexity, and if it's multi-center, you might have to work on a manual of procedures. You might have to have case report forms. You might need to create your database in REDCap or somewhere else. You might be hiring research coordinators. You might be training your techs for a multi-center study. You might want to have central planning to do all of this. So it's quite legitimate to build that into your startup time, as I've done. In reality, I did this all in advance. So that I was ready on day one to start recruiting patients, knowing that things snowball and it takes a while to do it. And really, that's the way to go. So as soon as you get a reasonable score on your grant, even if you don't know if you're funded yet, that's the time to do your IRB paperwork and to start doing all of this other busy work. As far as recruitment, I have to just echo what Chris was saying about PERC. PERC has been highly successful for my personal research studies. Some of the other things we do, I think talking to referring MDs is very important. So we had a PERC pop up in the primary care practices, but that doesn't work if there's just something that pops up and they don't know what it's about. So I went out to their meetings. I brought them cookies, so that can't come from your grant budget anymore, but that's okay. And I gave a talk explaining my disease, which is sleep apnea, why it's important, how the patients will benefit, in addition to the practical aspects of how to refer patients. So you really want all your possible recruitment sources to be on board and to know what the study's about and why it's important. We communicate about patient results. So we let them know whenever one of their patients gets recruited to the studies. The last thing they want is for Johnny's mother to call and say, the study, what do I do? Or the doctor told me this, so they don't know what you're talking about. And sometimes we get unusual results. So my patients get ophthalmologic screening as part of this, and we found a couple of abnormalities. It's really important to get back to the referring physician about anything that could be clinically relevant. As well as to tell them the overall progress of the study and keep them interested. I recruit a lot from ENT. So in fact, I go to the ENT quarterly faculty meetings, which are 7:30 on Saturday mornings. They do serve a good breakfast, though. But I give them not just individual patient feedback, but overall how the study's going and what's progressing. And then when we move on to the next study, we could tell them about the publications from the previous one and keep the excitement level going. And if someone's really referring you a lot of patients, for instance, we worked with Mary Pippin on a Down syndrome and sleep apnea program, then I think it's fair if they're putting in a lot of work as well as intellectual involvement to include them as co-investigators, funding-wise, hopefully, for their time on this, and also in the papers that come out of this, because really you can't do that work without them. And then Bob alluded to make it worthwhile for the referring practitioners. So these are all very busy people, especially if you're recruiting from primary care. But even if you're recruiting from your own subspecialty, everyone is busy these days. And I know that my own clinic sometimes gets so hectic, I forget research to recruit for my own research studies. So for example, and I'm just reinforcing what you said, I tried to use the perk pop-up for this one study where I needed obese controls. And we were looking just at physiology. We weren't going to try to treat their obesity. So what this meant was the PCP would need to stop the clinic visit, mention the study, explain what it was about, and really that would involve probably some discussion of obesity as well, which maybe the pediatrician didn't want to do at that particular time and place. And I think we got no one, actually, from that study. On the other hand, with our OSA work, we've been extremely successful, including our chat study, which was published in the New England Journal, partly because we had such great recruitment. That was a study that NIH, the whole first year, tried to shut down because things were initially slow. So clinically, if a pediatrician sees a child with sleep apnea, what they would do clinically is they'd order a sleep study. There can be a 2 to 3 month waiting time to get that sleep study. They need to follow it up. If it's positive, they'll then send the child to ENT. Then they need to follow up. Does the child need a postoperative sleep study, depending how severe they were, etc. It's a lot of work. Now, if the child was in our chat study, the pediatrician just had to click on a perk prompt. We would contact the family. We would get the sleep study within 2 weeks in our research lab. We would do ENT if the patient needed clinical follow-up. We would do it for them. So this was a huge time saver for the pediatrician, and not just time, but often if they don't really understand the complexities of treating sleep apnea, it was a big load off their mind to know that the patient was taken care of. And on our part too, we really appreciated these efforts. So often we'd get patients who weren't eligible for various reasons, didn't meet all of our inclusion-exclusion criteria, or their sleep study was too severe or too mild. But we would take ownership of that patient once a child was sent to us and just help facilitate the clinical arrangements that needed to be done. So it has to be a two-way street. Other resources, the Metro paper we found incredibly helpful at recruiting. We've gotten lots and lots of patients, both normal controls and kids with disease, from the Metro. It's not free, it does take some money, but it's really helpful. We do get primarily inner city kids and primarily African Americans, which has actually been a problem sometimes when we needed to sort of balance out between a control and disease group. So keep that in mind. We've also had less success, but nevertheless, we've gotten quite a few patients from Craigslist, both, again, normal controls and patients with disease, and that is free. So there's less, in our experience anyway, less of a yield, but on the other hand, it costs us nothing, so what's it to lose? I can tell you, since people talked about texting and social media and things like that, we have tried Facebook. Limited success, but I think for various studies that might be a good way to go. And CHOP has resources to help you do this, which was incredibly helpful to us. As we keep thinking about the importance of recruitment, we need to keep at the back of our minds balance and equipoise. So whenever you publish something like a clinical trial, you're going to have a consort diagram, maybe not as complex as this one from our chat study, But somewhere down here, you're going to talk about the patients who dropped out, the patients who were lost to follow-up, the patients who crossed treatment arms. So as you're pushing and pushing to recruit and you're getting pressure from NIH to finish your recruitment, you want to be sure that you're keeping your equipoise and you're not recruiting kids who borderline as far as inclusion-exclusion criteria. If a family sounds really hesitant, you really don't want them to push them to be in a study that they're really not buying into totally, because then they're going to drop out. And that will just give you a lot of aggravation and waste your time and affect your final study results. If you have enough patients crossing over or dropping out, it really invalidates your study. So somehow you need to keep that balance. Some of the keys to retention, I think the PI needs to be very closely involved. So I do a physical exam on all of my patients, and to be honest, it's not that important, but I think it's important for me to have a connection with the family, and I will tell them I'm always available. My research coordinator can always find me if you have any questions or concerns about the study, and to set up that personal link. Our coordinators in particular are great at setting up personal connections. It really struck home to me when one of our families actually knitted a pair of socks for our research coordinator. So setting up that connection, letting them know you can reach them for anything. The coordinator needs to be more than a secretary. They really need to understand the disease and be able to answer questions about the disease without running back to the PI each time, and really being the link for the families. We do build into our study design frequent phone calls at visits that might not, to be honest, be that necessary for the research, but I think are really important for retention and to show the families that we're concerned and to troubleshoot any issues they might have. So we will have a call or visit for our ongoing studies at least once a month for studies that go on for 6 or 12 months. And typically we'll have a short visit every 3 months, just to be sure that everyone's on track and that our family hasn't moved away. We do reimburse them, of course, for their time for all of these phone calls and visits. And one thing I haven't done, but I heard about recently, which I think is a great idea, is to have an ascending reimbursement scale. Because once they're coming for their 4th visit, it gets a bit tedious. And so maybe instead of reimbursing them $50 each visit, reimburse them $25 for the first visit, at $50 and $75. You can keep your whole budget neutral. But I think that does help as people get sort of fatigued with the study. And I must mention too, I was at a patient panel once, and it was the mother of a child who'd been in oncology protocols. And she said, look, I don't care about money. I care about help with things that are important, getting to my visits, helping with insurance where that's an issue. So a lot of families are not in this for the reimbursement. And they do get these barriers to research. So sometimes you need to have evening or weekend hours. They might lose their insurance halfway through when you're doing research procedures that also are paid for by insurance. So you need to help them with all of these issues. One of the best examples was actually Barbara Schmidt, who does these big neonatology studies. So she had this huge international study with something like 2,000 centers. And they just weren't getting the follow-up they needed in Brooklyn, New York. And she actually flew a psychologist out to Brooklyn to do psychometric testing of the patients because the site had lost their psychometrician. So you do what you have to do, whatever it takes. Our families are always moving. One thing we found very useful is to get the address and phone number of a contact outside the home. So if the families move, suddenly all of our phones are disconnected. We find that many of the families, their phones get disconnected over time because of budgetary and other issues, but they tend to keep their email address. And families these days are very receptive to email. And the other thing we do, we've got a standard part on our forms whenever we recruit patients for any study. We always ask if it's okay to contact them for future studies. And I know there are ChopWide resources that are trying to do that and set up a database of families interested. But just within our own sleep center, we do that all the time. And even if their kids have outgrown our study, often there's a sibling or a cousin who can be in future studies. We give our families a little backpack. We had really nice ones. Now we've had to go to these much cheaper ones. But anyway, the families like them. And we have all these little prizes that the kids get. Really helpful anyway when you've got a 5-year-old who's beginning to melt down at the end of a long research day. We could just keep driving them along. There are places like Oriental Trading Company where you could get things in bulk really cheaply. We send them birthday cards and non-denominational, I don't have a picture of that, but non-denominational holiday cards from your friends at the chat study or whichever study we happen to be doing. Just keep them in the loop. And then we also sent out newsletters, usually not to families, although I know there are a lot of studies that do send newsletters to families. But for instance, this was our CAP study, which was a multi-center study with sites in Australia and Canada. So to keep all of these very spread out centers together. And what we always did with our newsletters for this study was on the left hand, we had the data. So this might be hard to read, but we had 4 centers. So this is the recruitment data for each center. That gets a bit of competitive juices flowing. And status of our questionnaires. So this was stuff that was really important for our study. And on the right hand, we kept it lighter. We had fun facts. Because these studies were so spread out, we started off with a little photo and autobiography of people at each center so people could get to know each other. They just have that community feeling. So this says, after years of extensive research, I've concluded beyond any doubt that I need more grants. Let me stop at this point, and I'm happy to take questions if we're doing okay for time.